Eliot Martinez wiped his greasy hands on the old rag he kept in his back pocket, glancing at the clock above the garage door. It was already past 10 p.m. The garage was almost empty now, except for the familiar hum of the fluorescent lights and the rustle of his tools as he wiped down the engine he had just finished repairing. His mother, Maria, had been in and out of the hospital for months now, and Eliot couldn't help but feel the weight of it all. The mounting medical bills, the sleepless nights working to make ends meet. It was beginning to feel like a heavy burden that he couldn't shake off. "Eliot," the voice of his best friend Jimmy echoed through the dimly lit garage. "You done yet? I gotta go home before my mom starts yelling at me again." Eliot smiled faintly. Jimmy had been his friend since they were kids, but lately, it seemed like they had been growing apart. Jimmy's parents were struggling too, but not like Eliot. Jimmy had dreams of becoming a mechanic, but he didn't have the same responsibilities. His father worked long hours and his mom was still healthy. Jimmy's life was simpler. At least, that's what Eliot tried to convince himself when they talked. "Almost," Eliot replied, running his fingers through his unruly hair. The engine was fine, but he wasn't sure he could call it perfect. He never felt like anything was truly perfect, not the repairs he did, not his family's situation, and certainly not his own life. "You know, if you keep working yourself into the ground, you'll miss your shot," Jimmy said, dropping a rag onto a nearby workbench. Eliot raised an eyebrow. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I mean, you could be doing more than just fixing cars here. You've got skills, big ones. Why not use them?" Jimmy's voice was serious now, not the usual banter. "Why not go after something bigger?" Eliot paused. The weight of those words hit him harder than he expected. "I don't know," he murmured, looking back down at the car. "Sometimes it feels like I'm not even making a dent in it, in anything." He rubbed his eyes, trying to push back the frustration that was slowly building up. Jimmy was quiet for a moment. "I get it, man, but we're not getting any younger. Don't let the past hold you back from changing your future." Eliot let out a deep breath, standing up straight and wiping his hands. "Thanks, Jimmy," he said quietly, but there was a sense of finality in his tone. He appreciated the words, but they didn't feel like enough. There was more at stake than just his future. There was his mother's health, the mounting debt, and 1,000 little things that kept him up at night. No matter how hard he worked, it never seemed to be enough. He heard the familiar buzz of his phone vibrating in his pocket. Looking down at the screen, he saw a message from his mom. "I'm okay, Eliot. I'll be fine. Just remember to eat something." Her words were always full of love, always reminding him to take care of himself even when she wasn't in the best shape. But tonight, something felt different. There was a heaviness in her message, something he couldn't quite pinpoint. He set the phone down beside him, pushing the thought aside. "I'll be fine," he whispered under his breath, as if saying it out loud would make it true. But deep down, Eliot knew that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet understand. As he finished the final touches on the car, the garage door opened, letting in a cool breeze. He looked up and saw a familiar face, Harry Pierce, the businessman he had just fixed the car for earlier in the day. Harry stood there, arms crossed, his expensive watch glinting in the low light. He had a look of impatience, his sharp eyes scanning the garage. Eliot stood still for a moment, unsure of what to say, his hands clenched tightly by his sides. "That's a fine piece of work," Harry said, his tone casual but his words sharp. He eyed the work Eliot had done, but his gaze seemed cold, almost dismissive. "Thanks," Eliot replied, his voice tight. Harry didn't smile. "You've got a good set of hands, but you've got to learn to look at the bigger picture. There's more to this than just fixing cars, you know." His eyes narrowed, as if daring Eliot to ask what he meant. Eliot's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" he asked, not entirely sure he wanted to know the answer. Harry smirked. "You're not just fixing a car here, kid. You're fixing futures. Think about it. You could do more, with the right people, the right opportunities." His words hung in the air, almost like an invitation, but Eliot wasn't sure he was ready for whatever it was Harry was offering. The garage door clanked open, and a sleek black sedan pulled inside. its tires humming against the pavement. Eliot glanced up, wiping sweat from his brow, recognizing the car before he even saw the driver. It was the same one he had worked on earlier, the luxury vehicle belonging to Harry Pierce. Harry stepped out of the car, his polished shoes clicking on the concrete floor. He straightened his suit, a look of barely contained impatience on his face. He didn't look like a man who belonged in a garage. He looked like he belonged in an office, behind a desk, surrounded by papers and deals. "Kid," Harry greeted him with a curt nod. "You got this done yet?" His voice was flat, with an edge that hinted at a lack of respect. Eliot could feel his stomach tighten. He had spent hours on this repair, and yet Harry seemed to think it wasn't enough. "I'm just about finished, sir," Eliot replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Harry waved a dismissive hand, clearly not interested in the details. "I hope so. I've got places to be," he muttered, as if the garage was a hindrance rather than a service. Eliot stepped back from the engine, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked at Harry, but something about the way the man carried himself made him feel small, like his hard work was unimportant, overshadowed by Harry's wealth and power. "What do you want me to do with this?" Eliot asked, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Harry tilted his head slightly and looked down at the car. "I don't care about the details, just make it run." His eyes scanned the tools scattered around, but he barely seemed to acknowledge Eliot's effort. "You know, you should be working somewhere with more potential. You've got skills, kid. Why waste them here?" Eliot flinched at the words, but he didn't let them show. He had heard this before from others, people who thought they could measure a person's worth based on the job they had, but they didn't understand. For Eliot, this garage was more than just a paycheck. It was a way to support his mother, a way to fix the things that needed fixing. "Not everyone has the same opportunities," Eliot said, his voice quiet but firm. He looked up at Harry, noticing for the first time that the man wasn't just dressed sharply, but had an air of entitlement about him. Harry didn't react immediately. He took a few steps around the car, then turned back to Eliot. "True," he said, as if the conversation had bored him. "But you could be doing something bigger than this, more lucrative. A lot of people would kill for your skills. Ever think about that?" Eliot stared at him for a moment. "Not really." His voice had a bite to it now, though he wasn't sure where it came from. Maybe it was the way Harry spoke, as if Eliot's life could be measured by his paycheck. Or maybe it was because Eliot had spent so much of his life doing things for other people, just trying to make ends meet. He wasn't sure he wanted to be like Harry. Harry leaned against the car, the leather of his jacket creaking under his weight. "Well, you should. Don't you want something more than this?" He gestured to the dusty garage, as if it were beneath them both. "You could be working for someone who respects what you do, not just throwing away your time here. You ever think about that?" Eliot's mind raced, but his expression stayed neutral. He had heard this kind of talk before. People with too much money and too little understanding of the daily grind. He'd heard it from family friends, from distant relatives, all the way up to people who thought they could buy him. The truth was, he didn't have a choice. He had his mother to take care of. But something about Harry's words lingered. "Maybe you're right," Eliot muttered, half to himself. Harry raised an eyebrow, as though he hadn't expected Eliot to give in so easily. But Eliot didn't mean it. He couldn't afford to think that way. He wasn't like Harry. He had bills to pay, a sick mother who needed constant care, and dreams that seemed a million miles away. He wasn't going to let this moment shake him. "All right, kid, I'll leave you to it. You've got the job done?" Harry asked, his voice suddenly all business again. He didn't seem to care about any of the personal talk anymore. It was as if he had moved on. But Eliot couldn't. "Almost. Just finishing up the last touches." He nodded toward the engine, trying to ignore the weight of Harry's gaze. "Good," Harry said, pulling a thick envelope from his jacket pocket. He tossed it onto the workbench. Eliot froze. He had worked so hard on the car, but he wasn't sure if Harry even cared about the quality. Was this just a transaction to him? Harry turned to leave, but paused at the door. "You might want to think about that offer. People like me don't come around often." He didn't look back as he walked out, his footsteps echoing in the silence that followed. Eliot stared at the envelope. People like me don't come around often. Harry's words played over and over in his mind, but Eliot couldn't shake the feeling that he had just made a deal with someone who didn't care about him, about his life, or about anything beyond the transaction. As the garage door closed behind him, Eliot stood there, alone with his thoughts. He wasn't sure what to think, but deep down he knew something had changed. A door had been opened, one he didn't know whether he should walk through. Eliot sat alone in the dim light of the garage, his hands still covered in grease. The car was done, but the nagging sense of something missing lingered. His mind kept returning to Harry's words from earlier. People like me don't come around often. They echoed in his thoughts, making him feel both intrigued and unsettled at the same time. The envelope Harry had left behind sat on the workbench, untouched. Eliot hadn't dared to open it. He knew it was probably just payment for the job, but something about it didn't sit right with him. He wasn't sure what he was expecting. Maybe a thank you, or a job offer, or something else entirely. The weight of the unknown kept pulling at him, distracting him from the task at hand. His phone buzzed suddenly, breaking his train of thought. Eliot grabbed it, his thumb hesitating over the screen for a moment before he saw the name. Unknown, he answered, his voice a little shaky. Hello? Mr. Martinez? The voice on the other end was crisp, formal. This is Samantha Daniels from Tanner & Company law firm. I'm calling in regards to the inheritance left by your late father. Eliot froze. His father. The name seemed foreign on his lips. He had never known the man. To Eliot, his father was just a shadow in the background, a distant figure who had disappeared years ago, leaving only questions in his wake. The letter from the lawyer earlier flashed in his mind, but this was real. I don't understand, Eliot said, his voice a little more guarded now. I don't have any inheritance. My father, he wasn't in my life. There was a pause on the other end, as if the woman was checking her records. Then her voice returned more carefully. I understand this is difficult, but the estate has been located. It includes significant assets, a property, investments, and a portion of stock in a company tied to Pierce Enterprises. Eliot's heart skipped a beat. Pierce Enterprises. That name was so familiar. Harry Pierce's family, a connection he hadn't even considered. The surprise and confusion hit him like a wave. I'm sorry, but I think you have the wrong person, Eliot said, shaking his head, even though no one was there to see it. I don't have anything to do with that family. Samantha's tone softened, but there was an undercurrent of urgency in her voice. Mr. Martinez, we've confirmed everything. The inheritance is directly tied to your father's dealings, and it includes a controlling interest in Pierce Enterprises. We need you to come in as soon as possible to finalize everything. A cold shiver ran down Eliot's spine. His father had been involved in Pierce Enterprises. Eliot couldn't wrap his mind around it. How? Why? There had to be a mistake. I'm sorry, I don't understand. This is too much, Eliot stammered, his head spinning. I know this is sudden, but the estate needs to be settled, and there are legal matters to address, Samantha explained. Please, Mr. Martinez, we just need you to come in and meet with us. The sooner, the better. Eliot stood still, his mind racing. There had to be a catch. There had to be more to this than just a surprise inheritance. Was Harry involved in this? Was this why he had been so insistent that Eliot could do something bigger than this garage? Eliot took a deep breath, feeling the weight of it all. His family had always been his priority, but now everything was suddenly tied up in a world he had never been part of, a world of money, power, and connections. I'll come by tomorrow, he said finally, his voice quieter now, but I need some time to think. Of course, Samantha replied almost too quickly. We'll be expecting you. As Eliot hung up the phone, he stared at the screen, the words Pierce Enterprises still lingering in the air. His heart was heavy with questions, and a growing sense of unease filled his chest. He had known there were secrets in his family's past. His father's involvement with Harry Pierce and his company only added to the mystery. What was his father's true connection to all of this? And what did it mean for Eliot's future? The phone call felt like a turning point, a fork in the road. Eliot wasn't sure where the path would lead, but he knew he couldn't go back. Tomorrow would bring answers. But the more he thought about it, the more it felt like the answers were already written. and he was merely a character in someone else's story. He glanced at the envelope again. A new life. That's what Harry had said, wasn't it? But was it really a new life? Or was it just another layer of manipulation? Eliot's fingers curled into a fist, his decision already starting to form. The past had a way of catching up to people, and it seemed his was coming at him faster than he could handle. Eliot sat at his small kitchen table, staring blankly at the phone in his hands. The conversation with Samantha Daniels still lingered in his mind, like a fog he couldn't shake off. Pierce Enterprises. It all seemed like some sort of dream, one he wasn't ready to wake up from. His thoughts kept circling back to that night when Harry Pierce had stood in the garage, speaking with such certainty about opportunities beyond the tools and grease of the garage. Was it all connected? Had Harry known more than he let on? A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Startled, he rose to his feet and opened it. There stood Jimmy, his best friend, wearing his usual crooked smile. But there was something in his eyes, a concern that wasn't typical of him. "Hey man, you good?" Jimmy asked, stepping inside without waiting for an answer. His voice was casual, but Eliot could tell he was worried. They hadn't talked much since that last shift at the garage. Eliot had been too caught up in his head, too distracted by the mounting pressure from his mother's illness and the phone call. "I'm fine, just thinking," Eliot replied, not wanting to explain everything. It wasn't that he didn't trust Jimmy. It was more about the weight of the situation. Jimmy sat down across from him, uninvited but completely at ease. "You've been thinking a lot lately, huh? About that guy, Harry Pierce?" he asked, his voice lowering as if speaking about the man might make the whole situation feel more real. Eliot exhaled sharply, setting his phone down on the table. "Yeah, Samantha called me today. She says I'm part of my father's estate." He looked up at Jimmy, his words sinking in with the weight of the revelation. "I don't know what to think about it. I never even knew my father." Jimmy didn't speak for a moment. He just looked at Eliot, processing the information. Finally, he broke the silence. "You think Harry knew about all of this? That you were tied to his family's business somehow?" Eliot didn't answer immediately. He was still struggling to make sense of everything. The inheritance, Harry's behavior, the connection to Pierce Enterprises. It didn't add up. "I don't know," Eliot said softly. "But it feels like a trap, you know? Like they're pulling me into a world I'm not ready for." Before Jimmy could respond, Eliot's phone buzzed again. He reached for it instinctively, already knowing it was from the law firm. The message was brief. "You are formally invited to a meeting with Pierce Enterprises tomorrow at 2 p.m. Your presence is requested to discuss the next steps." Eliot's hand froze over the screen. The words felt like a weight he wasn't ready to carry. "I didn't expect this," he muttered, looking up at Jimmy, his mind racing. "It's happening faster than I thought. I don't know what to do, Jimmy." Jimmy leaned back in his chair, his face serious now. "You know, man, this is big, but don't let them push you around. You've got a choice in all of this." The room felt heavy, the silence between them stretching long and thick. Eliot knew Jimmy was right, but the enormity of the choice still loomed over him. He couldn't escape the fact that his life and his family's future might depend on this meeting. But at what cost? "I'll go," Eliot said after a pause, his voice firm though uncertainty lingered in his eyes. "I have to go. I need answers, but I don't know if I can trust them." Jimmy nodded, understanding the weight of the situation. "Just don't forget who you are, all right? They're offering you something, but they won't be the ones who save you." The words lingered, heavy with meaning. Eliot couldn't help but wonder what Jimmy had been trying to say. Trusting Harry Pierce, trusting anyone involved in this inheritance, felt dangerous. But without a choice, how could he back down now? Later that night, as Eliot sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the clock, he replayed the day's events over and over in his mind. The invitation, the weight of his father's secrets, the growing feeling that something was amiss. When he closed his eyes, he saw nothing but shadows and the unsettling face of Harry Pierce, his sharp eyes cutting through the fog of confusion. Tomorrow, Eliot would have to face them, face the truth, whatever that meant. He only hoped he could still walk away with a piece of himself intact. Eliot stood in front of the mirror, staring at the reflection staring back at him. The black suit he had borrowed from Jimmy felt foreign on his body, too stiff, too shiny. He adjusted the collar, wishing it didn't feel like someone else's clothes. He was used to grease-stained shirts and worn jeans, not the polished look that people like Harry Pierce probably wore every day. His phone buzzed on the bed, breaking his trance. It was a message from Samantha Daniels. "Don't forget, Pierce Enterprises expects you at 6 p.m. We're looking forward to your presence." Eliot's fingers hovered over the screen. He wanted to respond, to ask more questions, but everything felt so surreal. He wasn't ready for this. How could he be? What did he even know about the world he was about to step into? Taking a deep breath, he grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. There was no turning back now, not with the promise of an inheritance, not with his mother's bills piling up. This could be his way out, or his downfall. The venue was nothing like the small, crowded spaces he was used to. The grand ballroom was illuminated with chandeliers so bright they almost hurt his eyes. The smell of expensive perfume mixed with the sound of laughter and clinking glasses. Eliot felt like a fish out of water as he stepped inside, eyes darting around nervously. Everyone here seemed to belong. They were confident, composed, rich. He stood by the entrance for a moment, unsure of where to go, when a voice called out to him. "Eliot!" He turned, and there she was, Charlotte Pierce, Harry's sister. She looked as poised as always, her dress shimmering in the light as she approached. A smile broke across her face when she saw him. "You made it," Charlotte said warmly, extending her hand to him. "You look great. Don't worry, no one here bites." Eliot took her hand, offering a tight smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Thanks. It's a bit overwhelming." She laughed softly. "I get it. I remember my first time here, all the flashing lights, the people trying to be important. But trust me, it's all just smoke and mirrors. Come on, let me show you around." Charlotte led him through the crowd, introducing him to several people who seemed more interested in their own reflection than in anyone else. Eliot couldn't help but feel like an outsider. He didn't belong here. His hands were sweaty, his heart racing in his chest. But Charlotte was kind. She guided him through the evening, making sure he didn't feel too uncomfortable. And yet, despite her friendliness, there was something unspoken between them. Every time she mentioned her brother or Pierce Enterprises, Eliot could sense a distance in her words, like she was trying to avoid something. They reached the center of the room where Harry stood, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd. When he saw Eliot, his face broke into a smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Well, well," Harry said, his voice smooth and commanding. "I wasn't sure you'd make it, but I'm glad to see you here. The evening's just getting started." Eliot nodded, trying to keep his composure. "Thanks for the invitation." Harry motioned to the group of people surrounding them. "These are some of the most influential people in this city, Eliot. They can make or break you, but you're here now, so I guess that means you're on your way." Eliot swallowed hard, trying to make sense of his words. On his way to what? What was all of this really about? Was this just a game to Harry, or was it more than that? Before he could ask, Harry clapped him on the back. "Come, enjoy the night, get to know people. Remember, you're part of this now." As the night wore on, Eliot couldn't help but feel more out of place. The champagne, the laughter, the smooth conversations. It all felt like a world he wasn't meant to be a part of. Yet with every passing minute, he felt the weight of Harry's words settling on his shoulders. This was his opportunity. This was the chance to get out of the cycle of poverty, to help his mother, to finally escape the grind of the garage. But at what cost? Charlotte returned to his side at one point, offering him a glass of champagne. She smiled at him, but it was different this time. There was something guarded in her eyes. "I know this all feels strange," she said softly, leaning in so no one else could hear. "But you need to know something, Eliot. There's a lot more going on here than you think. Harry, he has his own reasons for bringing you in. You're not just a guest here. You're part of a bigger plan." Her words sent a chill down his spine. Eliot opened his mouth to ask what she meant, But before he could speak, she was already turning away, rejoining the others. His mind raced. What did Charlotte mean? What bigger plan? Was this all part of the deal Harry had been offering? Was there more to the inheritance than he had thought? As the night continued, Eliot tried to push the thoughts aside. He couldn't afford to get lost in doubts now. But as he glanced across the room at Harry, standing tall among the crowd, Eliot couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into something much deeper, something far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The next morning, Eliot couldn't shake the feeling that the world around him had shifted. The fancy event, the champagne, the smiles, it all seemed like a dream now, something he had never truly been a part of. But the message from Samantha Daniels still lingered, buzzing in his mind like a constant reminder. Pierce Enterprises, the inheritance, his father's connection to it all. It was too much to process in one night. He sat at his kitchen table, the envelope from Harry Pierce still unopened beside him. His mother's voice echoed in his head, urging him to find out the truth, to not let the past control him. Yet, every step he took felt like he was wading deeper into a murky sea. The unknown was closing in. Eliot picked up his phone and dialed Samantha's number, his fingers trembling slightly. When she answered, her tone was all business. "Mr. Martinez, I trust you received our message regarding the meeting?" "Yes," Eliot replied, his voice tight. "But I need more information. I don't understand what this inheritance means. What does it have to do with Harry Pierce? My father, I never even knew him." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "I understand this is a lot to take in, Mr. Martinez. But the truth is your father was heavily involved with Pierce Enterprises. In fact, his investments helped shape the company in its early years. The inheritance you're entitled to is significant, but it comes with responsibilities. You need to meet with Mr. Pierce to discuss the details." Eliot's heart skipped a beat. His father had been involved with Pierce Enterprises? That wasn't possible. His father had always been a shadow in his life, someone who had disappeared without a trace. How could he have been involved with such a powerful family? "Mr. Martinez, I know this is difficult, but we need you to understand the full extent of your father's dealings," Samantha continued, her voice steady. "This isn't just about the money, it's about legacy." Eliot hung up the phone, feeling the weight of her words sink in. Legacy. His father had a legacy, but it was nothing like the one Eliot had imagined. His father had been a man of secrets, and now Eliot was tangled in a web he couldn't escape. He stood up from the table, pacing the small apartment. Pierce Enterprises. He had no idea what he was stepping into, but he knew it wasn't just about money. Harry's words from the night before replayed in his mind. "People like me don't come around often." Eliot had always known Harry was part of a world he didn't understand, but now he realized just how deep the connections ran. Eliot made his decision. He couldn't back out now. He needed to go to the meeting, but he also needed answers. Later that afternoon, Eliot arrived at the office building that housed Pierce Enterprises. The towering glass structure was a far cry from the small garage where he had spent most of his life. He walked inside, the cool, air-conditioned lobby swallowing him whole. The receptionist gave him a polite smile and gestured for him to take a seat. Eliot sat, his legs bouncing nervously. This was it. He had come this far, and now there was no turning back. His mind raced, but the doors to the conference room opened, and Harry Pierce appeared, wearing his signature suit, his presence commanding the room. "Eliot," Harry greeted him with a smile that felt more like a warning. "I'm glad you could make it. Please come in." Eliot followed him into the room, his heart pounding. As he sat down across from Harry, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Harry seemed almost too calm, too collected. "So," Harry began, folding his hands in front of him, "I'm sure you have a lot of questions. I'll start with the basics. Your father and I were involved in several business ventures together. His investments were instrumental in the early growth of Pierce Enterprises. The money you're entitled to is significant, but it's tied to your involvement in the company." Eliot stared at Harry, his mind racing. Tied to the company? This wasn't just about money. It was about control. His father had been part of this world, and now Eliot was expected to follow in his footsteps. "You need to understand something, Eliot," Harry continued, his voice softening slightly. "This isn't just about you getting a check and walking away. This is about continuing what your father started. This is about taking your place in a world that's far bigger than the garage you've been working in." Eliot's thoughts were a whirlwind. He had been raised to believe he wasn't part of this world, that people like Harry Pierce were nothing more than figures on the other side of a glass wall. But now, the wall was crumbling, and Eliot was standing on the other side, wondering if he could ever truly be a part of it. "You've always had potential, Eliot," Harry said, leaning forward. "You just need to choose whether you want to use it or continue living in the shadows." Eliot swallowed hard, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. Could he trust Harry? Could he trust this world? And more importantly, did he even want to? As the meeting came to a close, Harry stood and offered his hand. Eliot hesitated for a moment before shaking it, his thoughts swirling. There was so much he didn't understand, so much that didn't feel right. But he was already in too deep. "I'll give you time to think about it, Eliot," Harry said. "But remember, some opportunities don't come twice." Eliot nodded, feeling the walls of this new world closing in around him. Eliot sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the phone in his hands. The meeting with Harry Pierce was still fresh in his mind, the weight of the decisions he had to make pressing down on him. Harry's words echoed in his thoughts. Some opportunities don't come twice. The inheritance, the controlling stake in Pierce Enterprises, it was all so much for Eliot to grasp. His father, the man he had never known, had left him this tangled web of wealth, power, and responsibility. A legacy, Harry had called it. But to Eliot, it felt more like a trap, a heavy chain he couldn't escape. His mind kept drifting to his mother. She had fought so hard to keep their lives together, even when everything seemed to be falling apart. She had always believed in him, in his potential. But now, everything felt uncertain. This inheritance, this world of suits and corporate deals, was this truly the future she had wanted for him? The phone buzzed again. Samantha Daniels' name flashed across the screen. Eliot hesitated for a moment before answering. "Mr. Martinez, I trust you've had time to consider the offer." Her voice was calm, professional, but there was an edge to it that made Eliot uneasy. "I'm still thinking," he said, his voice tight. "But I need to know something first. What exactly does this inheritance entail? What do you want from me?" There was a long pause before Samantha responded. "As I've explained before, Mr. Martinez, this inheritance is more than just financial. Your father's involvement in Pierce Enterprises was significant. His legacy, your legacy, is tied to this company. We need you to step in and take the reins." Eliot's pulse quickened. Step in and take the reins. Was this all really his to claim, or was he just another pawn in Harry's game? The thought gnawed at him, making his stomach turn. "I don't know if I'm ready for all of this," Eliot confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not sure I even want to be involved in this world." There was a brief silence on the other end, followed by a sigh. "I understand your hesitation, but you must know, the choices you make now will affect everything. This is not just about money. It's about control, about power." Eliot leaned back against the wall, his mind swirling. Control, power. Were these the things he wanted, or was he just being drawn into a world he could never fully understand? "I need more time," Eliot said, his voice firm. "I need to think about this. I'm not sure I can just jump into something this big without knowing the full consequences." Samantha's response was quick and to the point. "Time is of the essence, Mr. Martinez. This opportunity won't wait forever." The line went silent again, leaving Eliot alone with his thoughts. He looked at the clock on the wall. The meeting with Pierce Enterprises was set for the following day. He had no more time to ponder. The decision had to be made now. Eliot walked into the living room, his heart heavy with the weight of the decision before him. His mother was sitting on the couch, her fragile figure slumped over as she read a book. She had always been the one to hold things together, to reassure him when things got tough. But now, Eliot wondered if he was about to lose the one thing that truly mattered to him: his integrity. He walked over to her, sitting down next to her. "Mom, I got the call," he said quietly, The one about the inheritance. They want me to take over my father's share in Pierce Enterprises. They want me to be a part of all of it. Maria looked up at him, her tired eyes filled with a mix of concern and love. Eliot, she said softly, this is a big decision. I know you've been struggling, but you have to decide if this is the life you want. If you take this on, you're not just inheriting money, you're inheriting everything that comes with it. I know, Eliot replied, his voice barely above a whisper, but I don't know if I can handle all of it. The lies, the secrets, everything that comes with this company. Maria placed a hand on his, her touch gentle but firm. You've always been strong, Eliot. But remember, power doesn't always make you happy. It doesn't fix the things that matter. What will make you happy is staying true to yourself. Eliot looked at her, his eyes filled with uncertainty. He knew she was right. The money, the power, the connections, it all seemed too easy. But the cost was high and he wasn't sure he was ready to pay it. I'm not sure what the right choice is, Mom, he confessed. I'm torn between helping you and getting out of this mess and stepping into a world I don't even know how to navigate. Maria smiled softly, her voice full of wisdom. Whatever you choose, Eliot, remember that you can never lose yourself in it. The world will try to change you, to make you forget what really matters. But don't let it. Eliot sat in silence, her words sinking deep into his heart. Tomorrow would bring clarity, or it would drag him deeper into the world he wasn't sure he wanted to be part of. The decision was his, and only he could decide the path he would take. The following days felt like a blur to Eliot. He tried to ignore the calls from the law firm, his thoughts constantly drifting back to the meeting with Harry Pierce. The weight of the inheritance was suffocating, and he had no idea what to do with it. Every choice seemed like a gamble, a step toward a future that felt increasingly out of his control. It was on the fourth day after the meeting that Harry called. Eliot had been avoiding his calls, but there was something about the way Harry's name appeared on the screen that made him answer. Eliot, good to hear from you. Harry's voice was smooth, almost too smooth. I think it's time we discuss the next step. Eliot rubbed his forehead, trying to steady himself. I'm not sure I'm ready for this, Harry, he said, his voice hesitant. I don't know what it means to be part of your business, or if I even want to be. Harry's chuckle on the other end sent a chill down Eliot's spine. I understand your hesitation, but think of it like this. This is your chance to change everything. Your father's legacy, your future, it's all on the table, Eliot, and it's waiting for you to take it. Eliot felt his grip tighten around the phone. The legacy, the future. The words echoed in his mind, mingling with his mother's voice, the one warning him not to lose himself. But he couldn't ignore the pressure of the situation. His mother's bills, the debt. This could fix everything, or it could ruin him. He wasn't sure which. All right, Eliot finally said, his voice betraying more than he wanted it to. I'll meet you, but I need you to be straight with me, Harry. No more games. Of course, Harry replied, his tone shifting. We'll talk tomorrow. I'll have everything ready. Eliot hung up, his heart racing. Tomorrow. He had made a choice and now he had to follow through. But as he stared at the phone in his hand, doubts crept in. He had never asked for any of this. This wasn't the life he had imagined for himself. Yet here he was, standing on the edge of a precipice, unsure of whether he should jump or turn back. The next day, Eliot arrived at Pierce Enterprises' headquarters, the sleek, towering building that had once seemed so distant to him. Now it felt like the center of a universe he was being pulled into. He walked through the marble-floored lobby, the weight of the building's silence pressing down on him. He was early, but Harry was waiting for him by the elevator. Eliot, Harry greeted him with a smile, but there was something in his eyes, a coldness that Eliot couldn't shake. I'm glad you could make it, Eliot nodded, his pulse quickening. You said you had something to discuss. What's going on? Harry motioned for him to follow. They walked through a set of large glass doors into a conference room with a view of the city. Take a seat. This isn't just about the inheritance. This is about your place in this world. Harry paused, letting the words settle. Eliot could feel the weight of them. Your father's role in this company was significant. You've heard me mention his legacy, but there's more to it, Harry said, his voice lowering. You're not just inheriting money, you're inheriting control, Eliot. The board, the company, it all comes down to you now. Eliot's stomach churned. Control. I don't know anything about running a business, Harry. Harry leaned forward, his eyes intense. That's where I come in. I'll help you, guide you, show you the ropes. But you need to understand, this isn't just a financial decision. It's a power play. And the moment you take it, you're in it for good. Eliot recoiled slightly, his mind spinning. Power. It was the last thing he had ever wanted, but the temptation was there. The promise of freedom, of stability for his mother. Was this the price he had to pay? Think about it, Harry continued, sensing Eliot's hesitation. Your future is in your hands. I can make sure it's everything you've ever dreamed of. Wealth, influence, respect. But it comes with a cost, Eliot, and that cost is your soul. Eliot blinked, taken aback by the bluntness of the statement. His mind raced. What did that mean? What did Harry really want from him? You're offering me a deal, Eliot said, trying to steady his voice, though his hands were shaking. But there's more to it, isn't there? This isn't just about taking over a business. You want me to do your bidding. Harry's smile was cold. I'm offering you an opportunity to finally be part of something that matters. But you need to understand there's no going back. Once you accept this, there's no escape from the life you're stepping into. Eliot's thoughts were a whirlwind. How could he turn back now? He had come too far. The deal was on the table and he was already in too deep to walk away. All right, Eliot said, his voice quieter now. I'm in. I'll take it. Harry's eyes gleamed with approval, but there was something darker behind them. Good. I knew you'd make the right choice. Welcome to the family, Eliot. As Harry extended his hand to seal the deal, Eliot felt a sense of unease flood through him. He had made his choice, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a dark pact, one that would change everything. It had been 2 weeks since Eliot officially signed on with Pierce Enterprises, and everything had changed. The weight of the company, of the legacy his father had left behind, had settled onto his shoulders like a suit too large for him. Every decision now felt heavy, like the world was watching, waiting for him to either rise or fall. Eliot had spent the past few days in meetings with the board of directors, sitting in rooms full of people whose faces he didn't recognize, their eyes sharp and calculating. They spoke in jargon that went over his head, and he was constantly fighting the feeling that he was an imposter. But Harry had made it clear. He was in charge now. You're part of this now, Eliot, Harry had said in their last meeting, his tone smooth, almost reassuring. This is your legacy. You're not just inheriting money, you're inheriting power. Use it wisely. Eliot wasn't sure what to think about Harry's words anymore. Every interaction with him left him more confused. On one hand, Harry was offering him the world, but on the other hand, the more Eliot became involved with Pierce Enterprises, the more he felt like he was losing himself. The phone call came late one night, just as Eliot was preparing to leave the office. Mr. Martinez, the voice on the other end was Samantha Daniels again, her tone clipped, urgent. We need you to attend an important meeting tomorrow. There's something we need to discuss regarding the company's future and your involvement. Eliot's chest tightened. He had been expecting more meetings, more decisions to make, but the urgency in her voice told him that something was wrong. I'll be there, he said, his voice a little too eager. He wasn't sure why. Maybe he hoped that showing up would somehow make sense of all this, the inheritance, the pressure, the looming question of whether he was really ready to take on this new life. The next day, he found himself walking into another cold, glass-walled conference room. This time, Harry was already there, seated at the head of the table, his hands folded, his eyes calculating. Glad you could make it, Eliot, Harry said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Please, have a seat. Eliot sat down across from him, trying to hide the unease that churned in his stomach. There were several others in the room, board members he hadn't met before. Their eyes were on him as if he were some sort of new recruit being tested. We've been reviewing the company's recent performance, Harry began, his voice steady, and there are some concerns. You need to make a choice. Eliot's pulse quickened. Make a choice? What did that mean? There are people who question whether you're the right person for this position, Eliot. Some believe you're unqualified to lead. They don't believe in your potential." Eliot felt the sting of those words. He wasn't naive enough to think that the board was just going to hand him the reins without scrutiny, but hearing it out loud made it real. He had no background in business, no qualifications beyond his father's shadow and Harry's promises. Was that enough to carry him through? "Let me be clear," Harry continued, his eyes narrowing. "You're not just here because of your father. You're here because I believe in you, but you need to prove that you can handle the weight of this responsibility. The power we're talking about, it's not free." The words hung heavy in the air, and Eliot could feel them like chains tightening around him. The cost of success was becoming clearer. It wasn't just about the money, it was about control. Control over his life, over his choices, and over the people around him. "And if I can't prove myself?" Eliot asked, his voice rough but steady. Harry leaned forward, his gaze hardening. "You'll be replaced, Eliot. There are plenty of people waiting in line for your spot. But I believe in you. I'm giving you this chance, but you need to make the right moves. I'm offering you the keys to everything, but you have to decide what you're willing to sacrifice for it." Eliot sat there, his mind racing. The weight of Harry's words pressed down on him, suffocating him. Was this the cost of success? Was this what he had signed up for? To trade everything he believed in for power and control? He thought of his mother, of the sacrifices she had made to keep their lives together. She had always told him to stay true to himself, to never compromise his morals. But the world Harry was offering was one of compromise, one where the end justified the means. "I understand," Eliot said, his voice quieter now, almost distant. "I'll do what it takes." Harry's smile returned, but this time it was colder, sharper. "Good. Welcome to the real world, Eliot. Now let's talk about your next steps." As Eliot sat there, listening to Harry outline the path ahead, something inside him shifted. He had made his choice. He had accepted the price. Now he had to live with it. Eliot sat at the massive oak desk in his new office, his fingers tapping restlessly on the smooth surface. The city sprawled beneath the tall glass windows, but Eliot's gaze was distant, unfocused. The office was sleek, modern, a reflection of the new life he had stepped into. Yet the emptiness of the room mirrored the emptiness inside him. He had made his choice. He had accepted the inheritance, the power, the control. But every day, it felt like a piece of himself was slipping away. The board meetings, the financial reports, the constant pressure to perform, it was all consuming. Harry's face seemed to hover over his shoulder constantly, guiding his decisions, shaping his every move. "Eliot, you've got this," Harry had said a week ago, his voice calm but firm. "Keep your head down and do what needs to be done. The company, the family, they're all depending on you." Eliot had nodded, pretending to understand, pretending that the weight of those words didn't make his chest tighten. Now, sitting alone in the office, he felt like he was suffocating. He wasn't sure when it had happened, but somewhere along the way, the choices that were supposed to define his future had become a cage. A golden cage, perhaps, but a cage nonetheless. He picked up the phone, staring at it for a moment before dialing his mother's number. He needed to hear her voice. "Eliot?" Her voice crackled through the line, tired but warm. "How's my boy doing?" "I'm fine, Mom," he replied, his words coming out stiff. "Just busy, you know how it is." There was a pause on the other end, and Eliot could almost hear the concern in her silence. She had always known when something was wrong. "Eliot, I know you've got a lot going on, but I can tell something's eating at you. You've been working yourself to the bone, and I know you. You're not yourself." Eliot bit his lip, pushing back the emotions that threatened to surface. His mother had always seen through his defenses, and it hurt more than he wanted to admit. The guilt, the pressure, it was all too much. I'm trying to make things better for us, Mom," Eliot said, his voice low. "But sometimes I feel like I'm losing who I am. I don't know if this is the life I'm meant for." There was a long silence on the other end. Then his mother spoke, her voice steady and full of love. "Eliot, you've always had a heart that wanted to help others. I've never seen you do anything that wasn't for the people you love. But don't forget who you are, son. Don't lose yourself in all of this." Eliot closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. Her words felt like a lifeline, but also a reminder of how far he had strayed from what truly mattered. Was it worth it? Was it worth sacrificing his soul, his values, just to keep climbing higher? The weight of it all was beginning to crush him. The world of Pierce Enterprises was a world of compromise, of hidden agendas and power plays. He had seen it firsthand in his dealings with Harry and the board. Every decision was a trade-off, and Eliot was starting to feel like he was paying a price he wasn't sure he could afford. The phone call ended, but the doubt remained, growing louder with every passing second. Just as Eliot was about to leave his office for the day, a figure stepped into the doorway. It was Charlotte Pierce, her face as composed as always, though her eyes held something more. "Eliot, can we talk?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. Eliot nodded, gesturing for her to sit. "What's on your mind?" Charlotte hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I can see the toll this is taking on you," she said quietly, her gaze locked on his. "You've been changing, Eliot, and not just in the way you do business. You're starting to lose something important." Eliot leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know what you mean," Charlotte sighed, her eyes filled with concern. "I think you do. This world, the world you're in now, it's not who you are. I've watched you go from someone who cared about the right things to someone who's driven by fear of losing it all, fear of letting go. But in trying to hold on to everything, you're losing the most important thing of all, yourself." Eliot's chest tightened. How could she see it? How could she know? The pressure, the fear, the sacrifices, they had all blurred into a single, unrecognizable reality. And Charlotte was right. He was changing. But did he have the strength to stop it, to change course before he was too far gone? Charlotte reached out, placing a hand on the desk between them. "Eliot, you're at a crossroads. You can continue down this path, but I promise you, there's a price to pay. And it won't just be money. It will be your soul." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. Eliot stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I know," he muttered, his voice low and pained. "I know it's too late. I'm already too far in." Charlotte didn't say anything more. She stood up and walked toward the door, pausing just before she left. "It's never too late to turn around, Eliot, but only if you want to." Eliot watched her leave, her words lingering in the air long after she was gone. The breaking point. He was closer to it than he had ever been. The boardroom felt suffocating. Eliot sat at the head of the table, his hands clenched into fists on the smooth wood, his gaze fixed ahead. The meeting had already dragged on for hours, and each passing moment only made him feel more like a stranger in this world, a world he had once believed could offer him a way out. But now, as the board members argued over numbers and strategies, Eliot felt a deep sense of disillusionment settle in. The promise of success, the allure of control. It all felt like a cruel joke. It wasn't about vision or legacy anymore. It was about power and the price of holding on to it. Harry had warned him that there would be sacrifices, but Eliot hadn't fully understood what that meant until now. The company's recent move into new markets hadn't been as smooth as expected, and the pressure to perform was weighing on him. The higher he climbed, the further away the ground beneath his feet seemed. A voice broke through his thoughts. "Eliot, we need your decision," one of the board members said, his tone sharp. Eliot looked up, his mind still swimming in confusion. "The financials are in crisis. You're in charge now. What's your next move?" The words felt like a weight on his chest, suffocating him. His throat was dry as he glanced at the documents spread out before him. A series of bad investments, missed opportunities, and growing debts. All of it was his now. This was his mess to clean up, his responsibility to carry. He swallowed, trying to steady his voice. "We need to restructure, start cutting costs, focus on the core assets." His voice cracked slightly, betraying his inner turmoil. Restructure, cut costs. Those were the words Harry had drilled into his head in their private meetings, but now the decisions felt less like strategy and more like desperation. As the meeting continued, Eliot felt increasingly alienated from the people around him. They spoke of profits and losses, corporate maneuvering, But he was no longer sure of who he was in all of this. Had he become just another cog in the machine? Was this really the life he had wanted? The fallout from his decision to step into this world was becoming clear. It wasn't just the mounting financial stress. It was the moral cost of everything he had compromised to get here. Every handshake with Harry, every boardroom deal, it was all tainted by a growing sense of unease. Later that evening, Eliot found himself walking the empty halls of the building. The quiet was almost suffocating, the hum of the city outside seeming miles away. He paused in front of a large window looking out at the sprawling skyline. For a moment, the enormity of everything, the wealth, the responsibility, the power, seemed too much. He had wanted it, yes, but now that it was his, the burden was crushing. He had lost himself in the pursuit of something he had believed would save him, something that had promised stability. But all it had brought was chaos. His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him from his thoughts. He pulled it out, seeing Charlotte's name on the screen. His heart sank. "Eliot," Charlotte said when he answered, her voice strained. "I've been hearing things. The board is making moves without you. They're pushing for more aggressive cuts. You need to act fast." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had known the tension between the board and Harry was building, but hearing it from Charlotte made it feel real. He was losing control, and not just of the company, but of himself. He had been too naive to think he could manage everything without paying a price. "I'll handle it," Eliot said, trying to mask the fear in his voice. "I'll fix this." But deep down, he knew he couldn't fix everything. The weight of the decisions, the lies, the betrayals, it was too much for one person to carry. "I don't know if you can fix it, Eliot." Charlotte's voice softened, her words heavy with concern. "You're becoming someone I don't recognize. You're losing yourself in this world, and I'm afraid it's too late to turn back." Her words struck a chord deep inside him, and for a brief moment Eliot thought he could see through the fog of his decisions. Could he still get out? Could he step away from all of this before it consumed him completely? "I have to go, Charlotte," Eliot said quietly, hanging up the phone. He stood still for a moment, the weight of everything pressing down on him. As he walked out of the building that night, the city lights blurred in his vision. The future that had once seemed so bright now seemed like a distant, unreachable dream. The cost of success was clearer than ever. The price of power, of control, had taken more from him than he was willing to admit. And now, he wasn't sure who he was anymore, whether he had ever known. Eliot stood by the window, looking out over the city. It was early morning, the streets just beginning to stir with life. For the first time in weeks, there was a sense of peace inside him, quiet but profound. The weight he had been carrying for so long was no longer suffocating him. He could breathe. The decision to leave Pierce Enterprises had been the hardest one he had ever made. The legacy, the money, the power, he had walked away from it all. But in doing so, he had found something that had been missing for a long time: himself. It hadn't been easy. Walking away from everything he had worked so hard for, the promise of a better life for his mother, the security he had hoped to provide. It all felt like a loss at first. But slowly, as the days passed, he began to see the truth. True success was not measured in the weight of a bank account or the size of an empire. It was measured by the integrity you carried with you, the relationships you nurtured, and the choices you made. Eliot glanced at the desk in front of him. It was a simple space now, with only a few items scattered across it. Papers, a family photo, a worn notebook. He had sold his share in Pierce Enterprises, donating the money to causes he believed in, giving back to communities he had once turned a blind eye to. He had no desire to climb back into that world, to be entangled in the corporate games that had once ruled him. The phone on his desk buzzed. He picked it up, recognizing the number immediately. It was Charlotte Pierce. She had reached out to him once or twice since his departure, but this call felt different. "Eliot," Charlotte's voice crackled over the line, her tone softer than usual. "I just wanted to check in. How are you doing?" Eliot leaned back in his chair, his lips curving into a small smile. "I'm doing all right. Better than I have in a long time." "I know leaving wasn't easy," she said, her voice quieter now. "But I think you made the right choice. I never told you this, but I respect your decision. You walked away from something that would have consumed you." Eliot paused, the sincerity in her words touching him in a way he hadn't expected. "It wasn't an easy choice, but it was the only one that felt right. I've learned a lot in the past few months. About business, about myself, about what matters." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line before Charlotte spoke again, her voice more thoughtful now. "Sometimes we have to lose everything to find ourselves. I think you've found the right path, Eliot." Eliot looked out the window again, watching the first rays of sunlight break through the skyline. He thought about his mother, how she had always believed in him, even when he had lost sight of who he was. She had been right all along. Staying true to himself was the only way forward. "I couldn't do it without you, Charlotte," he said, his voice low but genuine. "You were the one who made me see that I didn't have to sacrifice myself for success. I don't know if I would have found my way without your honesty." Charlotte's voice softened, a faint laugh escaping her. "You always had it in you, Eliot. You just needed to remember who you were." He smiled, feeling lighter than he had in months. "I think I'm finally getting there." The rest of the day passed in a haze of contentment. Eliot had spent years chasing after a future that he thought would save him. But now he realized that what he had been searching for was right in front of him the whole time. It wasn't in the power or the wealth. It was in the freedom to live authentically. As evening approached, Eliot sat down to dinner with his mother, just the two of them. They talked about everything, about the small changes in their lives, the new path Eliot was forging for himself, and about the future. There was no longer the sense of impending doom that had once loomed over them. The financial struggles were still there, but there was hope now. They were building something together, something real. Eliot realized that he had finally come full circle. He had gone from a boy who was lost in his father's shadow to a man who had found his own way. The dark pact he had made with Pierce Enterprises had been a turning point, but it was no longer the thing that defined him. He was Eliot Martinez, and for the first time, he was living his life on his own terms. "Mom," he said as they finished their meal, "I think I finally figured it out. Success isn't about the big things. It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard." Maria smiled, her tired eyes warm with pride. "I always knew you'd figure it out, Eliot. You just had to believe in yourself." And for the first time in a long while, Eliot truly believed. What do you think of Eliot's actions? Share your thoughts in the comments below. On a scale from 0 to 10, what's your score for this story? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an update on our latest stories. And make sure to check out more heartwarming tales by clicking here on the end screen.